all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie, and welcome to a Throwback Thursday edition of Booksmart, where I select an old favorite book from my small collection of books I've saved over the years. For this very first Throwback Thursday episode, I chose the first adult book that forever launched me into the reader I am today, for better or worse. I read it the summer before 6th grade, several times. It's Flowers in the Attic. Now, before you roll your eyes, I have to take you back in time to 1988. We had just moved to our new house, and I was finally going to get my pink room that I had dreamed about forever. I was still sort of playing with Barbies. My mom was the best seamstress ever, so my Barbies had Dirty Dancing Barbie clothes. Out of my bookshelf, I created different floors of Barbie rooms. One was a dance studio with my Barbies in their Dirty Dancing Barbie clothes with the baby grand piano. I covered the back in aluminum foil to look like a mirror. I also kept Grumpy Bear, my very first Care Bear from 1983, sitting on my dresser. My room was in this transformational stage. I had a collage of Dirty Dancing pictures on my closet doors and had my first Marilyn Monroe poster hanging on my wall. Boys were still gross, except Johnny Depp in 21 Jump Street and Corey Haim in The Lost Boys. I wouldn't transition from record albums to CDs until the following year when Madonna's Like a Prayer would become my first CD. MTV was always playing on our basement television, and I spent my summer reading books my sister and I borrowed from the bookmobile. My sister was 4 years older than me, and she had the whole Sweet Valley High series. Remember those? I read Sweet Valley Twins and Nancy Drew books. I was going to start reading my sister's Sweet Valley High books since I was starting to find the Sweet Valley Twins books really childish. But then my sister gave me this sucker. She couldn't stop talking about it and said I had to read it. My sister and I either totally agreed on movies and music or totally did not, but because she raved about it so much and gave me the overall plot, I just had to read it. And thanks to V.C. Andrews, I never read a Sweet Valley High book. If you aren't familiar with Flowers in the Attic, here's the rundown. It takes place in the late 1950s. A perfect blue-eyed blonde family with 4 kids, the youngest are twins, tragically fall from grace when their dad dies in a car accident. This really isn't a spoiler because it happens in chapter 1. Without a job or money, the mom takes her children back to her parents' house because they are filthy rich. The kids never knew their grandparents existed because of the horrific secret. This is a slight spoiler, so you might want to cover your ears if you don't want to hear it. The mom and dad are related. Their dad was their mother's half-uncle. Their grandfather doesn't know the children exist, so they must live and hide in the attic until his death so mom can inherit everything. The house even has its own name, Foxworth Hall. Isn't that fabulous? I love big old houses, and this sounded like a big old mansion, which was even better. Then the plot gets really crazy and nasty, even when compared with today's books, although I have little to compare it to since I rarely read fiction anymore. The bulk of the book takes place in the attic, so the 4 children are in prison there for a while. They decorate the attic with paper flowers, hence the title. Grandmother is definitely not making them chocolate chip cookies and reading them bedtime stories. And their mom, well, she's not the mom she was before their dad died. Christopher and Kathy are the older 2, and they deal with puberty-related issues, while the twins are only 5 years old, so they become sickly from lack of sunshine, nutrition, and just being stuck in the attic. There's a couple plot twists that keep you reading, and a tragic turn, or 2 or 3, that will shock you. If you haven't read it, it's one of those books that you should read, just because. I consider it one of those newer classics, definitely not the caliber of The Handmaid's Tale or Beloved, but more like Go Ask Alice or The Wave. The story, at least at the time, was original, suspenseful, and shocking. With that said, though, as an adult, I didn't find it as good as it was when I was in junior high. I probably read it a dozen times before 9th grade, which wasn't the least bit unusual. My sister and I could recite the dialogue to our favorite movies like 16 Candles, Better Off Dead, The Legend of Billie Jean, so reading Flowers in the Attic over and over and over again made sense to my junior high self. So let me read you the prologue, because it's one of the neater parts of the book because it kind of pulls everything oddly together. It is so appropriate to color hope yellow, like that sun we seldom saw. And as I begin to copy from the old memorandum journals that I kept for so long, a title comes as if inspired. Open the window and stand in the sunshine. Yet I hesitate to name our story that, for I think of us more as flowers in the attic, paper flowers, born so brightly colored and fading duller through all those long, grim, dreary, nightmarish days when we were held prisoners of hope and kept captives by greed. But we were never to color even one of our paper blossoms yellow. And then she talks a little bit about Charles Dickens, and she ends with this. So, like Charles Dickens, in this work of fiction, which she has in quotes, I will hide myself away behind a false name and live in fake places, and I will pray to God that those who should will hurt when they read what I have to say. Certainly God in his infinite mercy will see that some understanding publisher will put my words in a book and help grind the knife that I hope to wield. Ooh, that's quite the prologue. It really pulls you in. Referencing Charles Dickens' work well, I knew who he was and that he was responsible for my beloved Mickey's Christmas Carol. The prologue leads the reader to believe that this may just have happened, which appealed to me since I had just discovered Lifetime Television, which played non-stop made-for-TV movies that were based on a true story. If the burning bed could happen in real life, so could Flowers in the Attic. But as an adult, well, the writing isn't great. It doesn't blow your mind. It's good, certainly publishable, but it doesn't transcend time and place. The lengthy description of the attic is a little verbose. The book uses first-person point of view with Kathy as our narrator. She gets a little obnoxious, but that's from my adult perspective, not my childhood one. The story moves forward primarily through dialogue since they're stuck in the attic and not much happens until the second part of the book. And then the stuff that does happen is earth-shattering, at least for a soon-to-be sixth grader. I read it again shortly after my son was born, which was about 18 years ago, and I remember thinking, this was my favorite book. But I still contend the plot is worthy of a read. Here's how the second part begins, and this is where the action for our captives in the attic really pick up. Because the grandmother's wrath had not yet materialized, Chris and I had grown careless. We were not always modest in the bedroom, nor were we always fully dressed. It was difficult to live day in, day out, and always keep the intimate places of our bodies secret from the other sex. And to be perfectly honest, none of us cared very much who saw what. We should have cared. We should have been careful. Ooh, talk about foreshadowing. It's one of those slow burn type stories, and the ending is completely worth it, the twist that blows your mind that you don't want to accept. Years passed, and then my son was in middle school. I started teaching full-time, this time at the high school level. Previously, I'd been an adjunct for over a decade at community colleges. Flowers in the Attic was listed in one of the Lit Circle offerings in contemporary literature. I couldn't believe it. My favorite book was now a teachable novel. I reread the book again, this time with the teacher brain, thinking about reading guides and project ideas as I read. All my students who read it loved it and said something along the lines of, "It was not what I expected, but it was really good." I'm just thrilled when my students read anything that hasn't been written in the past 10 years, so that's a win for me. When I put the rest of the Flowers in the Attic series in my library, no student made it past If There Be Thorns, which is the third book, having grown tired of the repetitive plot. I laughed at myself. I read the next 5 or 6 series before tiring of it. V.C. Andrews had died long before those books were written, and you could tell. The overused cliches, the juvenile writing became obvious and obnoxious, no longer worth reading. But the first 4 Flowers in the Attic books were all written by V.C. Andrews. I saved the entire Flowers in the Attic series, plus My Sweet Adrena. All the rest I traded in at my local used bookstore years ago for store credit. But with my overall goal at Booksmart, that the books I read should make me smarter, does Flowers in the Attic really teach us anything? I could go into a lengthy lecture on all that fiction teaches us, but I won't. Instead, let me highlight 3 aspects. Number 1, Flowers in the Attic teaches us to never, ever trust the movie. The first version that came out in 1987 was horrible. We watched the movie, rented it on VHS, remember those days? Shortly after I read the book, and it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. You'll see the copy, the book that I have, has the movie scene, since I think the movie partly bolstered the popularity of the book again, which is, I'm guessing, how my sister discovered it. The acting was even horrible. Even Louise Fletcher, who was terrifying in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, just kind of fell flat, as though she didn't have a lot of talented actors to work with. And Christian Slater should have been Christopher. Was he not available? Heathers didn't come out until 1988, so he should have had time. The more recent version on Lifetime isn't too bad, but it's still not good. I don't know why one of the streaming services hasn't created a limited series on it with all the fabulously hellacious, not appropriate for cable TV details. Number 2, Flowers in the Attic teaches us that characterization and plot twists are powerful tools in an author's toolbox. The way V.C. Andrews approached the story made you think that this could have actually happened, that maybe this stemmed from a true story. As far-fetched as the plot was, I was totally enamored with the characters and plot, which is all a good book really needs to do. And if Amityville had some truth to it, well, maybe this did too. And number 3, Flowers in the Attic made me leave all my elementary reading behind. I started reading Stephen King books, with The Shining my first. I pulled Helter Skelter off our bookcase in the basement, and yes, that book scared the hell out of me. I also started reading biographies on Marilyn Monroe. Maybe I was too young for such books, but it is what it is. Look at what kids of today have at their fingertips on the internet. So I'd say Flowers in the Attic was pretty tame compared to what today's kids have easy access to. Flowers in the Attic opened up the rest of the reading world to me, both fiction and nonfiction. I had always been a geek and always read well beyond my grade level, but now I could handle the more adult plots even if I didn't understand all the nuances that flew over my head. Flowers in the Attic made me shop for books in the entire library, not just the kids section, and I think I totally bypassed the young adult section. And for that, I thank Flowers in the Attic. So what was the book that transformed your reading from the juvenile section into the adult world? And does that book still hold up years later? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Here at Booksmart, my goal is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.